Well, hello and welcome to today's session, Job Analysis Rebooted, Scaling the Unscalable with AI, Skills Data, and a little less pain. For decades, job analysis has been fundamental to workforce strategy, defining how work gets done, what skills are needed, and how we hire, promote, and pay people. But let's be honest, it hasn't exactly kept pace with today's dynamic world of work. That's what we're here to talk about. Thanks to advances in AI, labor market data, and dynamic skills frameworks, we finally have the tools to rethink job analysis, not just as an AR or workforce development process, but as a strategic enabler. Today, we will explore how organizations are making this shift and how you can too, whether you are working in the public or private sectors. I'm Christopher Laney, Vice President of Social Impact and a labor economist here at Lightcast, and I can't be more excited about this discussion. If you have any questions during today's event, please put them in the Q&A just to the right of you, and we'll try to get to them during the Q&A portion. Now let's start out with an audience poll. Can you find the poll link there at the bottom of the chat window? The question is, what's your organization's biggest challenge when it comes to job analysis today? Feel free to take a minute or two and write them in the chat box now. While you're doing that, I'll go ahead and get to our incredible group of experts who are reimagining job analysis at scale in both the public and private sectors. First up, I want to start with my colleague Cole Napper, VP of Research, Innovation, and Talent Insights at Lightcast, and author of People Analytics, using data-driven HR and Gen AI as a business asset. Cole's led talent analytics and workforce planning functions across organizations like FedEx, Texas Instruments, Grainger, Toyota, and he brings a behavioral science lens from his background in IO psychology. Next, I bring you Alex Brown, Global Head of People Analytics, Innovations, and Data Science at Nestle. Alex is leading global design and deployment of cutting-edge data solutions across BI, data science, and strategic workforce planning, and brings a unique perspective from working inside one of the largest, world's most complex and far-reaching organizations. Rounding out the panel today is Dr. Dan Puka, as Chief Science as Human Resources Research Organization, also known as HUMRO. Dan is one of the leading voices in modernizing job analysis with over 20 years of experience applying IO psychology, AI, and machine learning to everything from assessments to career guidance. He's worked with both federal agencies and Fortune 500s and is a fellow of both the APA and SIOP. And again, I'm Christopher Laney, and in my role at Lightcast, I have an opportunity and pleasure of leading our social impact division, working across national nonprofits and foundations to build more equitable and future-ready education and workforce systems. I've worked alongside state governments across the country to shape policy around credentials, emerging industries, and economics of workforce transformation. I'm excited to dive into this topic today, not just because job analysis is fundamental, but because it's finally changing. We'll cover 4 big areas in today's conversation: the scientific foundation of job analysis, why skills, KSAOs, task, and job architecture actually matters a great deal; how AI, skills ontologies, and labor market data can automate and modernize the outdated methods; key differences between public and private sector approaches and what we can learn from each other; and lastly, a practical roadmap to connect job analysis with compensation, talent mobility, and workforce planning. So let's get started. Let's first look at the poll results here that you guys just wrote in. What your organization's biggest challenges with job analysis today? 42% saying too time consuming, 22% lacking consistency. Don't reflect the evolving nature, probably the labor market. So across the board, there's a lot of challenges facing job analysis today. So to get started, I'm going to go ahead and bring in Dr. Puka, who's going to come in and he's going to share you a great overview, who has spent nearly 2 decades helping the private and public sector organizations modernize job analysis. So, with that said, Dr. Puka, take it from here.
All right. Thank you, Chris. As Chris said, I'm going to just help us level set here on this topic, share a little bit about my experiences with scaling the unscalable with respect to job analysis, and kind of just provide some insights into where things have been and where things I think are headed. Right. Okay, so just to level set, job analysis, as most of us know, provides ideally, not always, the foundation for a lot of HR related activities, right? Recruiting, selection, training, performance management, strategic workforce planning. But in addition to those uses, it also provides a foundation for things outside of organizations. So think of vocational counseling applications, job search, career exploration, counseling. All of that also requires accurate profiling of jobs to help guide people to opportunities that may work well for them. Okay, so what are the questions that often we set out to answer with job analysis? So really it focuses on two things. What do people actually do? Whether we still believe jobs exist or not, we still want to know what people are on the hook to do in terms of performing work. So this might be tasks, this might be roles, this might be responsibilities. And from that, we ask what attributes are actually needed to perform a job, its component roles or responsibilities. So this is something that we've been studying in IO psychology for roughly 100 years, where once we know what people are tasked to do on a job, we have models and an understanding of what knowledges, skills, and other traits are required or beneficial for performing those jobs. And so when we look at models of job performance, typically those break down into three components: declarative knowledge, which is kind of book knowledge you need to know to do the job; procedural knowledge and skill, which is sort of the how to do it and your skill at executing; and then motivation to actually utilize those knowledges and skills. That is, are you going to do it day in, day out? Even though you have, a high capacity to perform, are you actually going to exhibit it, right? And so there's models of all of this content in all of these domains, but job analysis is designed to help us kind of elucidate these types of things for a given job. So what's the challenge here? Well, historically, if you look at the job analysis literature and how it's been practiced, the focus is on methods that work really well on a small scale. So they involve a lot of SME judgment, and they're really focused on one job at a time. So think SME interviews, focus groups, surveys. There's a big human element. And this hasn't changed much over the past 100 years. And we've been doing job analysis for a long time. In fact, there was a history of job analysis written back in 1922. So there was already enough job analysis work going on at that time to write a history of what was going on. So this has been going on for some time. Now contrast that with reality, right? So job analysis is very intensive for large organizations. So when you have hundreds or thousands of jobs that you're trying to keep updated job analysis for, it becomes unrealistic. You pick and choose your battles. You focus maybe on high density occupations at the sacrifice of maybe other jobs in your workforce. Complicating that, you've got multiple regions, divisions, decentralized HR functions, and it winds up being quite a mess. So one of the questions that I've pretty much asked myself every day is, if we knew when our best practice processes that we have now, whether it's job analysis, assessment, development, whatever, were developed, and we now know, and we knew then what we know now regarding technology and AI, how would those best practices differ? And how do we reimagine best practice to reflect the reality of our current needs without sacrificing quality that was a big focus of when these methods were developed, nor our professional integrity? And this has pretty much been the focus of my career for the past 8 years or so on multiple fronts. So, dating back to 2017, my colleagues and I at Humro have been doing research and implementation work on leveraging natural language processing and machine learning to streamline job analysis processes for organizations at scale. So our first foray into this was back in 2018, where we developed supervised ML models to create KSA profiles as a function of 800 plus jobs for occupations, and we're able to replicate expert ratings of KSA importance pretty effectively. That dovetailed into some work we did on a large internal job board. We were taking vacancy announcements and basically inferring KSA profiles based on hiring manager descriptions and task lists for a job. So think about customized kind of KSA profiles on demand that were inferred based on validated supervised ML models. From those early stages, about 7 or 8 years ago, this has since spun off into several efforts that have capitalized on advances in large language models. So, one example is using embeddings to facilitate what jobs in the workforce are related to one another, what involves similar tasks. So, if you're planning on moving people around, what might be similar jobs or occupations that they might be able to transition into. And the technology we developed here actually provides the foundation of ONET's related occupation mapping framework that you could find online on ONET online. Uh, Beyond that, we've also did some work on identifying what's a task and what's not. So think about sourcing information from the web about what jobs involve. First question you may ask is, well, what does this job involve? So separating out things from like tasks versus skills actually matters in the context of job analysis. So since that time, we've had a lot of spin-offs of this work focusing on leveraging large language models to profile various aspects of occupations. Um, Most recently, doing some work on streamlining the creation of task KSAO linkages, which becomes really important if you're using a job analysis to defend the use of assessment for making a high stakes decision like who to hire, who to promote within your organization. Great. So just to close out here, in terms of impact and value, where we're seeing the most impact and value is really from, not surprisingly, from a process reengineering perspective and efficiency perspective. And our work in this area is impacting pretty much nearly every area of job analysis we work on with our clients, from generating better job descriptions to put in vacancy announcements, to maintaining and updating task lists, to identifying important KSCOs, to identifying related jobs to facilitate, say, internal career pathing, and to linking tasks to KSCOs. Basically, our work here is really empowering officials, hiring officials to create better vacancy announcements. So rather than just listing them as kind of marketing devices or selling the job, actually accurately representing what that job involves from both a task and skill perspective, which is often not the case with a lot of vacancy announcements. So the other element I want to touch on here is we're really shifting the definition of what's possible. Early on in my foray into this area, I would have clients who come and say, well, this is just not possible. And my response would be, it's not possible based on the current state of affairs and current best practice. But we offer ways to kind of reimagine what that best practice is, which essentially changes the usual cost, time, quality calculus to be able to do basically more with less time and less cost. So that's all I have in terms of my formal presentation. So I'll turn it back to you, Chris.
Thanks, Dan. That was fascinating and interesting. I was thinking about the relationship to motivation.
It sounds like we're having some technical difficulties with Chris.
Yes,
Um,
I didn't hear a question. Sorry.
yeah, I'll just kind of try to wing this one for a second. Dan, this is fascinating. I wanted to dig into one point you said before we move on to Alex, perhaps
Yep.
about the task KSO linkage. Can you say, practically speaking, why that's important, and kind of talk about how AI either enables that or has made that even more difficult?
Yeah, absolutely. So task KSAO linkages often arise in my assessment development work. So if you're an employer who is looking to develop an assessment for hiring or promotion, um, there's kind of job analysis standards, if you will, that are offered in the uniform guidelines regarding what types of information have to be present within a job analysis to defend the assessment for that purpose. So, one of the key things about that is if you implement an assessment and you can't conduct a local criterion related validity study, which involves getting job performance on incumbents and examining the relationship between scores on that assessment and job performance, then you're going to need an alternative way to defend your use of that that assessment for hiring or promotion. And part of that evidence involves having clear linkages between what people do on the job and the skills needed to perform those jobs. So if you have skills alone, it wouldn't be sufficient to defend that assessment on content validity grounds according to the uniform guidelines. Uh, what you would need is some form of evidence that those skills actually link back to what people have to do to perform that job effectively. And that takes the form of task to KSAO linkages, as I framed here. So in terms of why it's important, that's kind of the main reason, is it ties back to your ability to defend assessments used to make high stakes decision based on job analysis data.
Fantastic. I think Chris is back. Chris, do you want to take us into Alex?
Yeah, I would be happy to. It's the pleasures of working in a small town where internet coverage goes down, up and down a little bit over the last couple of days. So, but it's good to be back, and hopefully we don't have those issues again. Um, Alex, you're leading innovation at People Analytics and one of the most complex organizations in the world. From your seat, why does job analysis still matter, and how are you seeing it evolve in a large scale in a global environment?
No, absolutely. Yeah. So, look, the last few years, as we all know, have been challenging for many, many businesses and around the world in terms of the war for talent, changes in the way people want to work, changes in employee preferences of how they work, the impact of technology, and many others. But just to reference a few, and I'm sure this will continue. So, from a large scale business perspective, there's probably three key factors that I would say would be needed in order to thrive within this type of environment to really to be able to overcome it and succeed. So that might be around connecting business strategy with people strategy. I think that's critically important. It's not just knowing and understanding what matters in the business, but how does that actually drive the strategy? How does that drive the growth, the success of the business, and understanding the impact of business drivers on the workforce. Second, around understanding the jobs and skills the business needs to achieve that strategy. So how do you really make it down to a more granular level? And then thirdly is around those internal, external factors that will have the impact on strategy, on workforce, labor market changes, technology adoption, etc. So with that, armed with that information, knowing those particular areas, we can then build appropriate workforce plans to mitigate against the risks of that and to be ready for the future, to have that future ready workforce. And I think it's been referenced, certainly in a corporate setting, the factors two and three around understanding jobs and skills and the impact of different factors, it's very time consuming. It's very resource intensive using the traditional way and methods. So, really, what we're seeing from a business is a hunger, a need an appetite for data, for insights, for analysis at scale, though. So really reduce down the burden of effort, reduce down the time it takes, and bring that data and insights to the table as quickly as possible. And we're leveraging tools such as the data and the tools from Lightcast, inferring skills and various different data points, and creating that good enough baseline so that the business leader, the business can adjust and refine from that point. They really don't want to spend hours starting from a blank piece of paper. They want something accurate out the box with minimal effort, minimal input, I would say.
Well, as you just mentioned, that it's so time consuming, and you're mentioning some of the ways that you're starting to modernize job analysis. How do you strike that balance between flexibility and standardization, especially across regions and functions and evolving roles?
No, absolutely. And I would say we currently take a hybrid approach, and we're essentially building an ecosystem within Nestle. So we have standardization in the form of a global job catalog and global job architecture, which we borrow from Mercer. We've got the global skills taxonomy from the open skills from Lightcast. We've introduced a global learning experience platform for that skills assessment and the development through learning pathways. We have a standardized global approach to developing annual global and regional learning plans. So, what skills we want to develop and deliver, what key learnings and interventions do we want across our communities. So, that's what we do very much from a standardization point of view. We need to hook it together, we need to connect it in a consistent manner. The flexibility comes in then how we map skills to jobs within the business, how we allow for regional variances. We work with our functional and business communities at global and zone level to map skills to jobs. And then we allow that, we encourage that to be cascaded down through the community and also aligned across the layers of Nestle. Obviously, a very complex, very big organization. And when we talk about skills, we consider skills in two parts, of course, which would be skills that someone has, the skill assessment, the skill that the job needs, that skill to job mapping. And we look at the gap between the two. And here as well, when we look at the skills needed for a particular job, I think there could be even another step in terms of how you look at that is the skills needed to succeed and just to achieve the basics, fundamental of the role. But then, what are the skill levels and needed, and the skills needed to exceed, to outperform, to overperform, to achieve? And again, starting to bring that different dynamic, as there can be different target points as we look through. So we really need to continue to leverage technology and data to manage skills at scale. Across the organization, streamline, remove manual effort as much as possible, crowdsource internal, external data to drive more accurate inference of skills. And one of the key things as well is moving away from generic skills mapping. A one size fits all rarely works. To something that's really more personalized for our reality. And then I think in terms of what the future may hold, certainly I would say we would want to look a lot more at task. And going forward, I really see us looking much more at tasks more deeply, considering a task library. For me, a job is a collection of tasks, and tasks require skills to complete them. So if we can start to think in that mindset, we can think about how does technology impact tasks, and therefore how are skills needed to deliver the task will change. And in turn, then we can start to see how skills will evolve for a particular job. And alongside that, we might be considering things like technology library, so we can link that to tasks and still skills and start to see that interplay between them. But ultimately, we want to collect and store as much rich data as possible to allow advanced analytics at a job and a skill level.
So, just expanding upon that from a practical sense, how has skill and/or task played out in strategic workforce planning so far? And a little bit of point of privilege, just because it's a Lightcast webinar. How using Lightcast data played a role in that?
No, absolutely, and it's a great partnership with Lightcast. So, and we also have a great partnership internally. So we partner very closely with what we call our global learning development team. So they're driving the skills agenda, and as a people analytics team, we're driving being that data partner, being the strategic workforce planning experts. SWP falls into our domain. And we're bringing that together. So combining this knowledge and capability, working together to make sure collectively we have the right processes, the right people capabilities, the technology and the data in place to support a skills enabled organization. So workforce planning is really critical as an overlay for me over the top of things like skills and tasks and jobs, and having the right size, shape, and composition of our future workforce, anticipating the future needs based on those future business goals, as I mentioned. But a plan without action is worthless. That's what's really important. So that partnership internally and leveraging things like the Lightcast data, that really allows us to drive the action within the business, using that data, using the services from Lightcast as almost that baseline, and then being able to integrate that into strategic workforce planning so that we can overlay things over the top of that. So we can pick up the Lightcast skills library and skills mapping from the Talent Transform product as that baseline, and then critical roles, critical skills, what drives the strategy is all that additional strategic workforce planning overlay over the top. And then in turn, spinning off skills analysis and various different elements from that. And we have a 4B model. Many people have different Bs. We have the 4Bs, build, buy, borrow, bot. And we consider this at both a role and a skill level. And that's part of our approach to strategic workforce planning, how we target future skills, how we close that gap. Do we buy them externally? Do we develop them internally through the build strategy? Do we borrow them internally or external temporarily, or outsource to agencies? But ultimately, we're making every attempt to connect our ecosystem together and fully understand and manage the risks and opportunities from a skills, task, job perspective.
Thank you, Alex. As you were talking about the complexity of Nestle being, in many different countries and different departments, I bring in the correlation to the public sector, multi-layered governments across the board, and a lot of the same challenges that you're facing in the private sector, the public sector faces. I would argue one of the primary differences is in the private sector, you're a little bit more ahead when it comes to the job analysis work, at least from what I've seen, especially in the state governments that I've worked with. I want to bring in Cole in here to talk about the data specifically. Cole, you're going to kind of go through and talk about job analysis, the data required. I know you have some slides here. Let's talk about what you're going to share, and then I got some questions for you.
Sure. So, oh goodness, that skipped way too far. So we asked the poll question to start out earlier, and I think 43% of people said the job analysis takes too long, right? And I think even 13% of people said they're not doing it at all, right? If you add those two together, that gets over to the majority of people here. And I think about what's the context of the world that we live in right now? We're having hundreds of people show up to a webinar about job analysis. That wouldn't have happened 3 years ago. And it's because all of us feel this, whether you're in the public sector or the private sector, the world is shifting beneath your feet, and jobs that were traditionally quite stable are changing quite rapidly. And one of the reason why this topic is so salient is because job analysis needs to evolve to keep up with the changing nature of work. And AI is a big part of that equation. But if you look at job analysis in its most simple form, it's traditionally task and KSAOs. If we think about that in the world of AI, the shorthand for KSAOs in kind of the labor economic sphere is skills. So it's not just the S of KSAOs. It actually includes the knowledge, skills, abilities, other characteristics, experiences, credentials, any kind of relevancy of a skill is that component. And so expertise from labor market intelligence and labor market data from Lightcast can play that role at scale. And I'll dig into that a little bit more deeply here in a second. But this is why we brought up this concept with both Dan and from Alex about the linking tasks to KSAOs. In my mind, AI is going to be able to help you do job analysis, the task portion of it, at scale for all generic tasks incredibly easily. Everybody has used it, to write a job description and say, what are the tasks associated with this? What's missing from that equation is any kind of organizational specific or kind of what I call the secret sauce task for an organization. If you're able to create that linkage of a task to a skill and then go through what I show you in a second with the ability of skills to link up to all labor market data, you can kind of create these heat maps of sorts to show how AI is going to impact the world of work so it doesn't feel like it's shifting beneath your feet. But what takes job analysis, which again, every organization that's tried to do job analysis in the past, you kind of have to do it role by role. It's a very iterative process. It takes quite some time. It's quite cumbersome. And organizations, whether if you're in the public sector or the private sector, sometimes you have hundreds, if not thousands, if not 10,000s of roles that exist. And if you're going to change the world of work overnight, you have to be able to do job analysis at scale, but also create the job architecture for all of those roles and that evolution. And so I want to show what does that look like in practice and how Lightcast data can help. And so we've created something called a skills-based job architecture. If you're able to combine Lightcast occupational taxonomy, which has over 1,800 roles within it, with Lightcast skills taxonomy, which again, skills encompass all of those KSAOs that I mentioned earlier, and go through the steps of this process that we have here, such as expert workshops, current state assessments, HCM integration. So again, I'll dig into more in a minute. You're able to actually do this not just for one role at a time, but hundreds, if not thousands of roles. And so what does it look like? I'm a pretty simple guy, so I try to boil this down to the simplest number of steps possible. And so I put this into 3 steps. The first step is taking a look at all of your internal job titles and normalizing them to Lightcast occupational taxonomy. And again, you can do this for 1 role, 10 roles, or 100 roles all at once. And once you've normalized those internal job titles, you can, to that occupational taxonomy, you have the wealth of riches of Lightcast data with the labor market intelligence about what that's going to look like. And when I talk about talent transform later, I'll give an example of what that looks like, because it's really quite powerful. And then the second step is connecting these occupations to Lightcast skills taxonomy. And so if you think about, and again, if you've made those task to skill linkages, now you've got the ability to look at this at scale. And so taking a particular occupation or many occupations at once and showing the skills that are relevant to that. And then the third step, and this is where it gets really critical, is you can connect these normalized skill-based occupations to a wealth of insights from the external labor market. Everybody wants to know what skills are related to other skills. They want to know, how is this related to compensation? What skills are growing? What skills are shrinking? How is this changing in the world of AI? And this is affecting all of us. And so you can have this real-time labor market data that is up to date, that's available to you at any moment.
Thank you, Cole. Let's talk a little bit about skills ontology. What is it, and how does it connect all the dots?
Sure. So this is kind of the next iteration of what it means going a step beyond a skills taxonomy. Is you want to be able to show what are all the interrelationships among skills, and how, if you pull one, what does it do to another? And again, if you can bring in and make these skills intelligent, you're able to tell more rich stories and make dynamic prescriptions about what to do with skills. So what does this mean in practice? What we've created at Lightcast, and again, I'll dig into this more when I cover Talent Transform in a minute, but if you have all these interrelationships, you can create a knowledge graph of all of the skills. And the metaphor that I use is, think about in badminton, that I actually found out earlier today that the little puck in badminton is called a birdie. Think about the shape of that birdie. And if you were to pluck one skill out of this knowledge graph and pull it forward, it would look like the shape of that birdie. And what that would create is, you would say, let's say that this skill is the entry-level skill, the most important one for an entry-level position in a particular role. Once you've pulled that little birdie backwards, you can see the second order skills that are needed for that role, the third order skills, and you can actually create an entire career path, learning pathway, and use it for assessments, what have you, to say every little thing that skill needs in the value chain of work by having a skills ontology in place and being able to use knowledge graph like capabilities. So it's a really a fascinating time to be in this space because so much evolution is going on at the moment, and companies like Lightcast are at the forefront of this evolution, as well as companies like Nestle and Humro.
Thanks, Cole. We talked a lot about structure and consistency today, but also about some of that messiness of how jobs are changing in real time. I think I even heard you might have said that we're not even sure about the definition of a worker anymore. So, how does labor market data help organizations stay current and build job frameworks that actually are useful for things like compensation, mobility, and workforce planning?
Absolutely. You know, why is job analysis relevant right now, and why is it relevant to the public sector, the private sector? Why is it coming up in workforce planning? Why is job architecture, one of the most important topics that organizations are thinking about in terms of AI transformation? Well, we used to find certain things as self-evident. One of those things is, what is a worker? Well, this is an academic article that comes from an IO-psychology journal that Dan and I would both be familiar with. And it's titled, If It Looks Like a Worker and Quacks Like a Worker, Is It a Worker? And so for the first time in history, we're having to ask ourselves what used to be self-evident is, what does it mean to be a worker in the age of AI? And thinking about going back to the task versus skills part of job analysis, if skills are fundamentally a human concept and tasks can be done in the BBBBB framework that Alex mentioned of build, buy, borrow, bot, maybe even AI agents can play a role in some of these tasks. And so it's really important. Are we defining an agent as a worker, or are they just a technology, or what? And these are discussions that I think are frankly unsettled at this moment, but they're really salient for, again, for the first time in history, in my opinion.
Thanks, Cole. We're going to go to another audience question. Thinking about everything that Dan and Alex and Cole shared, think about your organization. Where are you in the job architecture journey? Are you just getting started and have no formal framework in place? You have job descriptions, but they're inconsistent and outdated. You've built a job framework, but it's not yet yield the skills based. It's not skills based or dynamic yet, or you're actively using skills based architecture across multiple functions. So take a moment and fill that out in the chat box. And then while you're doing that, I'm going to pass it back to Cole to look at just some of the ways that organizations are using Lightcast products in the job analysis process. So Cole, right back to you.
Absolutely. Well, let's dig in here. So Lightcast likes to say that we're a DaaS company. And if you're not familiar with that type of jargon, what does DaaS stand for? It stands for data as a service. So historically speaking, most people are familiar with SaaS companies, so software as a service. But if you're thinking about what it takes to be AI ready, especially in the job analysis, in the job architecture space, and everybody talks about, in AI it's garbage in, garbage out. So if you put bad data into what you're trying to do, your AI is going to produce bad data as a result, and therefore those tools are going to be unusable. Well, what if you could do a key unlock and skip a whole bunch of steps and say, I've got good data and I've got good data at scale that's AI ready? Well, Lightcast has you equipped here in terms of, actually, these numbers are out of date. It's actually 3 billion job postings, 800 million profiles, and data from over 165 countries in terms of being able to share this data directly to you in whatever form that you like, whether it's direct data shares, through software, or through professional services. Lightcast has you equipped in terms of being AI ready. But what does this mean? One of our core products is a tool called Talent Transform. And this gets into what I was saying earlier about the role that ontologies play, the role that skills play, and kind of that little birdie from badminton that I mentioned earlier. Is in our tool called Talent Transform, you're able to look at any particular job title and job description and see the related roles, the related skills, map it into different job families and functions. So that's, again, getting into the job architecture elements of it. You're able to extract the skills associated from the job description and, again, make those task skill linkages, and even put in things like recommended skills. all of these can show you the wage and salary implications by adding and subtracting a skill, and show you the number of jobs that fit within that kind of job description or job title. And it's able to normalize these by going through that 3-step process that I mentioned earlier. And one of the really exciting things about Talent Transform is we have now released a tool called Skills Agent. And this is going to give you the ability to use AI and agentic platforms to keep your job architecture up to date. So one of the most if you've done this internally, like I know that Alex has and Dan has probably done before, and I know I've done in the past, is one of the worst days is when you publish your job architecture, because immediately it becomes out of date. And Skills Agent is intended to help you tackle that problem, because what it does is it makes proactive recommendations based on external labor market data to show you how the skills for any role, and then again, this could be one role, it could be 100 roles, it could be 10,000 roles, all changing at scale, and linking that not only to the Talent Transform data that we have in our tools, but back to your HCM, your learning systems, your recruiting platforms, and your talent marketplace. And what does that get you when you're thinking about job analysis at scale? Well, job analysis is traditionally done to help with pre-hire selection. Well, guess what? This is going to equip your recruiting platform. It's done to equip your ability to do learning at scale in your organizations. Well, guess what? This will be tied to your learning management systems. And it's intended to be able to tie to create a framework of people to navigate their careers internally at organizations. Well, guess what? It's going to connect to your talent marketplace and be able to do that as well. So it's a really exciting time to see what's going on here. And I think the last key unlock is Lightcast recently announced we acquired the company Rhetoric. Rhetoric now gives Lightcast the most comprehensive source of professional profile data of anywhere in the world. And so this is of any organization. This is what gets us to that 800 million profiles in 65 or 165 different countries. But this profile data, it makes the tools like Talent Transform, like Skills Agent, more robust, more AI ready than anything that's out on the market right now. So I think this is a fascinating time to be a part of the discussion and what's going on at Lightcast to help equip companies not only in the private sector, but also public sector organizations, which we know, especially at the federal level, we're going through massive amounts of transformation at the moment, and helping these organizations be AI ready with the best DAS or data sources that are possible.
Thank you, Cole. And before we get to Q&A, I want to go back to the poll that we just did. So I believe it's going to come up on the screen here in a second. Where is your organization at in the job architecture journey? It looks like good news is about 14% said they're just getting started. It looks like the majority are kind of in that middle. They have job descriptions, or they've already built some of those job frameworks. So very interesting. I want to go ahead and bring Dan and Alex back in for Q&A. One of my favorite places for like a really good, transparent conversation is around a campfire. So for our audience here, let's just imagine the four of us are sitting around a campfire talking about job analysis like one would do on a Saturday night. And so I'm excited to get to some of these questions. I'm going to go ahead and kick off, and feel free, if any of you want to answer, jump right in. First question, how does documentation change with AI across requirements, following principles and uniform guidelines, legal defensibility, and transparency, and using AI for those processes? Anybody have a hand raise?
I know Dan wants to take this one, so I'm just going to kick it his way.
Yes, sorry, Chris. Could you repeat the question? Because I was looking in the Q&A for chat, but I wasn't sure if you.
No, yeah, we're bringing a bunch of questions together to try to cover multiple questions that are being asked. So, how does documentation change with AI across requirements, following principles and uniform guidelines, legal defensibility, and transparency when you're using AI for these processes?
Yeah, my sense is it doesn't. So I've served on committees for SIOP. So, for example, revision of the SIOP principles for validation of selection procedures. And, one common question that always arises is, do our standards kind of change? And my response is typically, no, at the end of the day, we're still generating data or scores to draw some inferences. And whether those scores or inferences about a job or people are based on AI or some traditional methods, the standards for evaluating them and defending them kind of stay the same. So, in terms of documentation of AI informed job analysis processes, I would look at it the same way as we do a human process. What evidence can you show me that this is actually doing what it intends to do and does so accurately, like a human expert would do? If you can't demonstrate that, then yeah, you may wind up running into issues, just like you would with a human driven process.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Another question is, how accurate is the initial skill set inferred that you use as a baseline before refinement? Do you also see gaps in durable human soft skills and inferring and skills data used? How do they relate or enable more fully fledged competency models? These are really weighted questions.
Yeah, I know. God, I'll take a stab at this one, and I'd love to get Alex's perspective as well. Well, I think this is where the power of having an occupational taxonomy and having a skills taxonomy that have been validated, they're constantly updated, just makes it so much different at a company like Lightcast. Because if you don't have that type of data accessible to you, you're really, you're going back to your job description that you created 20 years ago that probably wasn't validated, or you're starting with just an open source tool like an ONet. And that can become quite challenging, especially when you're trying to make wide swaths of the company, do transformation efforts related to AI, or, just changes that are going on in the world right now. That becomes quite challenging to do at scale. And I think this is what sets up the ability to do good strategic workforce planning, which I know, Alex, you guys are doing over at Nestle.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it was a long question. I can't remember the full question, but I think, yeah, building on what Cole was saying, I think that for us, it's always around, if we do infer something or something comes from an external source, etc., is that's your baseline. We're in different industries. We've transformed businesses at different pace, at different change. We've got different cultures. So not every business, not every job is exactly the same. Some tasks already gone to shared service and center of scale and so on. So you can have differences, but certainly it acts as a very good baseline, a very good starting point. And from my experience, our leaders prefer that. They prefer to find the friction, find the problems, find the gaps, and tell you what's wrong, than they do to start from a blank piece of paper and try and tell you, okay, these are the skills that we need, and these are the competencies that drive that, and so on.
Thank you, Alex. Thank you, Cole. Are any of you concerned about mining your data for job descriptions, that it could add noise to like the relatable variables in the data? How is all this data going to be validated?
I think I would come in and say there's always a human in the loop. That's one thing I would add. This is not, an AI, all like turtles all the way down, but AI all the way down in terms of how to do this effectively. But I'd love to hear from you, Alex, how you guys are doing this in practice.
No, I'd agree, Colin, and definitely you also need to make it relevant to your business. What's your, you talked about special source, etc. What is it that's special, unique about your particular business, and therefore how do you take that good enough baseline and then really refine it better? So I'd say, that's one of the main things. And the other thing as well is, from a workforce planning perspective, as I mentioned, is where's the business trying to get to? What's the strategy that the business is trying to deliver? And you need to then look at the workforce, look at the roles, look at the skills, look at the tasks, and say, okay, which are the critical ones that I need to deliver that strategy? What's going to help me win? What's going to enable me? And then you take that subset, maybe whatever it may be, 10% of roles, you say, okay, I need additional focus, investment, and particular direction or drive or activity against those particular roles to win. So yeah, having a baseline is good, but as you say, it has to be a human in the loop, and there has to be additional elements and overlays over that data to really bring it to life.
Thanks, guys. What kind of empirical evidence is needed to support the links and their sequences depicted in the skills ontology?
Yeah, I think what this goes down to is if you take enough of the jobs data and the labor market intelligence data at scale already, which again, if you're ingesting 3 billion job descriptions via job postings every day, you're able to make these kind of linkages that any one organization couldn't make on their own. And so, and again, what we're not saying is for your organization and for your role, you have to trust the linkage that we've made. That's why we make, again, like those suggested skills or related skills, but you can add or subtract skills. And this is where the human in the loop is so important when using a tool like Talent Transform. Is you say, look, this skill or this task isn't relevant to our organization. So take those out. So we're saying, if you want to trust, again, the most robust corpus of knowledge in this space, feel free to, but those unique organizational things that are kind of idiosyncratic to just your organization, that's what matters the most for these organizations. And frankly, from a legal defensibility standpoint, which if you want to weigh in there, Dan, that would be helpful. But that's what's going to make this relevant to what's going on at your organization.
Yeah, and in terms of validation, I mean, one way to think about it is take a job, right? So you've got hundreds of thousands potentially of vacancy announcements on an accounting job, right? You also have data from maintained by the Department of Labor on requirements of that accountant job and what it involves that are sourced from human experts and achieved via traditional processes. So one question to ask is, if you aggregate all that information across all the accounting job vacancies and compare it to the skill set that emerges based on a traditional human process, do you see alignment in what you're getting from the job vacancies with the human experts, or don't you? Where are the deficiencies? Where are things maybe being missed in the standard methods that are being picked up by the vacancies? But a critical thing to remember is those vacancy announcements aren't often crafted to accurately capture all the skills needed for the job. They're sort of marketing devices, if you will, and that may result in deficiencies in skill coverage. And there is a literature on kind of job descriptions, what they cover, that exist within the academic literature that provides some insight into that as well. So it's a balance of kind of different sources of information and comparing them for overlap and uniqueness that could help in validating some of that skill information.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Cole. As to wrap us up, I have a two-part final question for all three of you. So the first question is, out of all the disciplines that we talked about today, I would like you to weigh on one that is something that you think every organization should be thinking about right now. I know there's a lot of disciplines, but what is the one that you're thinking about that is just a requirement that people either need to get started with or need to be doing right now? The second part of this question is, we know in this group, and probably most of the people on this call, how important this is. If you were, how would you convince a C-suite, a CEO, on the importance of investment in this area? Maybe a one-line or two-line, why this is essential. So that's the two-part question. One, weigh in on a discipline, take away from today's conversation. And two, convince your leadership why this is important and why we need to invest in this work. So I'm going to start with Cole because he's a Lightcaster and I can pick on him first.
Yeah, give me the hardest two-part question first. Thank you. Yeah, no, I would say that I'll actually answer the second one first. And I think this goes not just for a C-suite member, but somebody that's higher up in the public sector as well. Is the reason why this is relevant is the ground is shifting beneath our feet. The world of work is changing rapidly. And a lot of those times, the world of work is changing rapidly because of edicts that come from on high, where organizations are saying, you know what, we need to do, we need to make vast investments in productivity gains because of AI, or we need to change our workforce that has been consistent for 100 years and we need to flip it on its head overnight. That doesn't happen in a legally defensible manner if you're not doing job analysis effectively. And so I would say that's the relevancy of it. In terms of what was the first question again? Sorry, I just give me the
The first question is just all the things that we talked about today. What is the kind of the discipline that you want to weigh on that is just essential to this conversation for our audience to be considering?
Yeah, I would say, and I've hit on it a few times, is this concept of linkages. Right? The ability to, whether it's linking tasks to KSOs or skills, the ability to link skills to labor market data, the ability of linking labor market data to things like wages or salaries, or skills to one another to create a taxonomy or an ontology. I would say it's linkages is kind of that key component that I would say is the takeaway for me.
Dan, how about you? Oh, Dan, you're on mute.
Thank you. Had to do it at least once. Come on.
Right.
I'll start with the second question as well and then shift to the first question. So, more and more we live in a knowledge-based economy. It's all about the people you have in-house. And most folks, or arguably most organizations, have trouble doing job analysis right, whether it's a resource issue, bandwidth issue, what have you. This is a source of competitive value for our organization, right? So it's a tight labor market. Demands for talent are great. If we do this right, it could make a big difference. So I would argue more of its strategic importance in terms of the value of doing job analysis the right way to create value. In terms of the first question, for me, it all comes down to evaluation. So there's a lot of shiny objects out there, both on the assessment side and the job analysis side. Show me the evidence. Show me that it works. Show me that it replicates what we would get from a more traditional expert-driven process. And if it doesn't, what are the implications of doing that? And from the field I'm in, IS psychology, we have ways to evaluate the data through those lenses that are tried and true and that still hold regardless of whether we're talking about AI or human-driven methods.
Thank you, Dan. And no pressure, Alex, but everybody's going to leave here with whatever you say.
So look, I agree with everything that Cole and Dan said. Absolutely, the linkages, and if anything else, task. Really look into that linkage with task and how task's really going to drive a difference and influence the skills mapping. And we're a great opportunity. We've got the methodology, we've got the data. Now we've got the tools, with LLMs, etc., and what Dan shared. So it's a really exciting time now where we can really maximize the opportunity in this space. And the one thing I would say in terms of senior leader, look, get in a room with a senior leader, have a conversation with them, talk about what matters to them from a strategy, from a business perspective, what they're trying to achieve. Understand what jobs are really going to drive that. How will the workforce influence that, and which skills are the most important? And then simply, just ask them, well, what happens if we did nothing? If we didn't touch that, if we didn't deliver that, if we do nothing now and stay as we are, will you still deliver? Will you still be successful? Majority of the time they'll say no. So how are we going to get there together? What can we do in order to deliver and achieve that? And naturally then you'll get sponsorship and investment in these types of activities, would be my suggestion.
Well, thank you. Alex Brown, Global Head of People Analytics, Innovation, and Data Science at Nestle. Dr. Dan Puka, Chief Scientist at Humro. And of course, Cole Napper, VP of Research, Innovation, and Talent Insights at Lightcast. My name is Christopher Laney. I am so thankful that all of you have joined us. There are some questions we didn't get to, and we're going to try to follow up with each of those questions. Also, please let us know if you want us here at Lightcast to reach out to you. Just write in the chat that you're open for us to reach out to you. We can definitely talk to you about this. Maybe you just want to brainstorm. You might have saw some of the videos at the beginning. We do believe it starts with data and it starts with Lightcast. So feel free to reach out to us. We thank you so much for your time today and your energy in this conversation. Once again, thank you to our panelists for being here today. And we look forward to talking to you and continue to evolve what we know to be job analysis. Thank you.